Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
On this episode of the Sumud podcast, we uplift, empower, and amplify Lebanese-American writer, political activist, and journalist Rania Khalek, a well-known voice for her outspoken and uncompromising commentary on U.S. foreign policy. Rania is a host of Dispatches with breakthrough news. Her work has appeared in The Intercept, Jazeera, The Nation, Salon, Vice, and other publications. She is also known as a journalist who took on Piers Morgan and his two pro-Israeli guests in the debate and kicked their butt. I don't know if that's very journalistic of me. Rania, you can tell me later.
I'll take it.
There you go. Shout out to Abed Ayoub for connecting me with Rania. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen. Rania, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the lovely intro.
Oh, my pleasure. You deserve. You're out there on the front lines fighting for us, so I appreciate it. I just got to ask, I'm a little confused here. Your degree was in exercise physiology, and you wanted to go to nursing school, and all of a sudden you're like the Michael Jordan of journalism. I don't know.
Wow, that's a huge compliment. Thank you. That's a fair question. I did not major in journalism. I have a degree in exercise physiology. And yeah, you're right. I almost went to nursing school. Actually, it's the issue of Palestine that sort of changed the trajectory of my life. And then also independent media. It was the Obama-McCain election back in 2008. And I grew up like with a really political family, but I would say I was just a good liberal. I didn't really think too deeply about anything other than the Middle East because I was directly impacted by what the U.S. did there. But I remember Obama was running for election and his middle name is Hussein. And it was like a super basic thought. It's so silly looking back, but I genuinely thought to myself, okay, this guy's black. His middle name's Hussein. Like clearly he's just not going to bomb my country anymore, right? Or like my region anymore. And he'll be good on Palestine, obviously, because his middle name's Hussein, which is very simplistic to think. So I was like, I got obsessed with figuring out what's Obama's foreign policy on the Middle East. And I totally by accident stumbled upon independent media outlets like Democracy Now! And Electronic Intifada. And it was Democracy Now! Because at the time it was much more radical than I think it is today. That was a real gateway for me into all kinds of academics and independent journalists and just leftists who see the world in a different way than it had ever been taught to me. And I just went down this rabbit hole of Noam Chomsky and Eli Abunimah and Edward Said and just like everything you can imagine, Naomi Klein, like every sort of like person who's written a book or done really impressive journalism that can change the way you think. And then I was like, okay, I'm hooked. I can't go back to exercise physiology. I don't care about that anymore. I like have to write. I have to be a journalist. And so I kind of just like clawed my way into independent media from there. And now here I am. That's my backstory.
When you say good liberal, what does that mean?
I mean, like, I was like, oh, Democrats are better than Republicans, obviously, and I support, the reproductive rights. I definitely don't support wars. I'm against the Iraq War. Obviously, I understood the whole progressive, except for Palestine thing. I've always been pro-Palestine. I was raised that way because of my family's political background. But yeah, I mean, I just mean like in those kinds of ways, like I was a good meaning liberal. And I just say that because at the end of the day, like those are the people politically in this country who are there for the taking if we can just radicalize them. Because I used to be one of them, not the annoying kind that's you have to vote for Kamala Harris because like Democrats make the world better. And if you don't, screw you, you're basically just helping Trump. Not that kind of liberal, just the right sort of liberal tendencies that if you have a heart, you have in this country.
Yeah, completely get that. And you grew up in Lebanon?
No, I actually was born and raised in the U.S., but I did grow up visiting Lebanon because I have a whole village there.
Okay,
yeah.
Got it. And can you describe your experience? Because it's the same for me. I was born in the U.S., but I would go back to Palestine. What was your experience going back and visiting?
I think you could probably relate to this if this is your experience, because it's kind of that sort of hyphenated American identity, but that's not entirely American, where you don't really quite fit into the U.S., but you also don't really feel like you fit in entirely with like your native country because you're also really American, because you're just culturally very American. So the experience is important. I think when, you have the opportunity to go visit your country from the global south that usually your parents had to leave because of destruction wrought by some sort of something attached to U.S. foreign policy, which is the case for most of us from the Middle East. When you have the opportunity to go back and visit, I think it's really important to allow yourself, to give yourself like perspective on the world, because a lot of Americans are so sheltered. They don't have the opportunity to travel except to maybe go to some resort in like Mexico where they don't get to interact with the rest of the world. So I think it was a really important experience for me to be able to go and see that there's another part of the world where people live, where people have lives, where people have families, where people have hopes and dreams. And also just to see the impact of U.S. policy on Lebanon throughout my entire life. But I also just never felt like I fit in. And then it became a really big contradiction for me, especially when 9/11 happened. And you can probably relate to this too. I was in high school when 9/11 happened. I was a teenager. And it made me feel so ashamed of where I came from. I was made to feel that way by the US and its media and the way people around me talked about 9/11. I felt ashamed of where I came from. I felt ashamed of my people. I didn't want to be Arab more. I remember I have a sister who's so Lebanese and so Arab, and she would love to blast like Arabic music, and it would really embarrass me because I didn't want anyone to connect me with this area of the world that was considered to be like a terrorist haven. And looking back on that, I really hate that's the way that Arabs, at least of my generation, are made to feel in the US. They were made to feel completely ashamed of everything they came from. Like everything I represent and my family represents is just backwards and disgusting and murderous and hates freedom and hates life. And so I guess I say that to say that like today I feel like things are much different. And I see a generation of people who are teenagers or in their 20s who are completely different than I was at that age. They're not ashamed. They're so proud of where they come from. They're so outspoken. And they just don't care, like, call me a terrorist and I'll fight back. I'll protest even harder. But either way, like being able to visit Lebanon when I was younger definitely instilled in me an understanding of another part of the world that I think set a foundation for how I understand imperialism.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's this nefarious attitude that we're required to assimilate, obviously. But I wanted to ask you, did you see an inflection point with the change of those who tried to assimilate for many years after October 7th? Because that's really where I saw the pivot across the board myself.
Yeah, definitely. That's an important point because I think that I've been a pretty radical, unapologetic anti-imperialist for my journalistic career, at least. And it hasn't exactly made me friends. So I've always had that standpoint, whether we're talking about Lebanon or Palestine or Venezuela or Cuba, right?
Sure.
But so I've lived in Lebanon the last 8 years of my life. And there's been this like core of sort of like middle class, upper middle class, like comfortable, liberal, progressive types who are between Lebanon and the US, who always, I think, viewed the US as something that we should emulate culturally because they relate to it more culturally because they're like a lot of secular people. And also they have really good jobs at American universities or in other spaces who are Arab American or Arab, some Western hyphenation that we can add to that, who are comfortable in their lives, who did think of the US or Switzerland or the UK as like something to emulate. And Lebanon should be more like those places in that they actually do protect rights and they do care about like humanitarian law. And maybe on Palestine, they falter. But at the end of the day, these people also were becoming convinced because of a lot of investment by the West in this kind of propaganda that Israel's not really the enemy. The real enemy is actually like Iran and all of their proxies. And Lebanon would just be fine if it weren't for corruption and for Syria. That's like the only problem. The US isn't really a problem. It's just kind of there to help. We're sort of neutral. This has definitely undone all of that. And that includes the people in Lebanon that I'm talking about and people in the US. Just like, I think there's professionals who work in finance, who are doctors, who are lawyers that also happen to be Arab, that have been completely radicalized post-October 7th because they recognize that this country, the institutions that run it, do not see them as human. That if they were sitting in Lebanon or sitting in Palestine and an Israeli airstrike killed them, they would be framed by the New York Times or CNN as being human shields for a horrible terrorist organization without a second thought. Everybody sees it, everyone, those of across the political spectrum. And so I do think it's absolutely radicalizing people and changing their attitudes about what the US means in the Middle East and frankly, even in the world.
Yeah. So I want to just take a step back because I really want to understand how you became so well-versed in journalism. Were you always a good writer on the side? Were you always
I didn't particularly like writing, actually. Like when I was growing up, I didn't find it pleasant or fun. It was always a chore. I wasn't bad at it, but it just wasn't something I cared for. And it's just, I think I'm the kind of person, and maybe a lot of people can relate to this. It's like when you get really passionate about something, that passion can break through. And I'm a really passionate person. I feel very intensely. Rest of my feelings
get out of here.
very intensely, and it comes through. And so I think that as a writer, as a journalist specifically, I learned a lot. I have to give credit to Electronic Intifada. They kind of like raised me, taught me. Ali Abunima specifically, who's just like a wonderful person to his core, but is also an incredibly talented writer and journalist. And he taught me something really important that sticks with me till now, is that there's no space for us to make mistakes because we're under a microscope. Whereas they can just lie and never be held accountable. By they, I just mean whoever is trashing us or smearing us, whether it's like Israel supporters or some US government official or some stenographer for them at some major media outlet. So I would say I learned how to be a journalist from him. And from Electronic Intifada. Those were like my mentors. And it really helped set on a foundation for me of how I operate. As far as being on video, these are just things I kind of had to learn along the way. And I guess I have a little bit of a natural ability to do that, but also I've done it enough now where I've gotten good at it. I'm sure if you paired like a first interview I did to now, you'd be like, whoa, completely different person. It just comes with experience. But yeah, and then also there's people I really admire who I watched and learned from as well, in terms of I want to speak like them. I want to inspire people the way they do. And so I guess that's just how I operate. I learn from those around me. I'm a fast learner. And then I turn it into kind of my own thing.
So you're now that person that people strive to be. Just so you know, from all the feedback that I've gotten about you.
Wild.
So do you live in the U.S. or do you live in Lebanon, or do you go back and forth?
I live in Lebanon. I do have family in the U.S. Obviously, I don't know why that would be obvious. My immediate family is here, and I'm really close to them. So I do visit every few months. I'm actually stuck here right now because I left to cover the UN General Assembly in New York. I left Beirut in mid-September, just before the pager attacks, and I came with the expectation I'd likely stay to cover the elections. And now I'm just like, I don't know. I hope I can go back. I mean, I have an apartment in Beirut. I have a whole village in Lebanon. My life is there. My friends are all there whose lives have been completely upended. I don't want to say I'm displaced because that's not the right word to use considering what displaced people in Lebanon are going through right now. But I would just say anybody who's Lebanese who is in and out of the country has had their life upended in some way right now and is unsettled and doesn't know what the next week or 2 weeks or month of their life is going to look like, because you cannot plan anything under this situation that we're in.
Yeah. So talk about growing up with your family dynamic specifically, because your family, they're Druze, correct?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Can you educate us a little bit about that religion?
So,
for the best of your ability.
So I think the common stereotype about the Druze is that nobody knows what the Druze religion is, even the Druze. And there's a little bit of truth to that, at least. I grew up in a Druze family, though they were quite secular, but we don't. It's more of just Druze people are typically, they don't know much about their religion. Like some of them do, but it's the ones who become like sheikhs or sheikhas. The rest of us are just like, we're Druze, but we believe in reincarnation, and it's a monotheistic religion. I think it like branched off of Shia Islam, if I'm not mistaken. Someone's probably going to be like, that's not true. So sorry if I got that wrong. But I think I'm pretty typical of Druze people, both maybe in and out of Lebanon, who aren't the religious ones, like specifically that like are sheikhs and sheikhas who have some idea of it. Like, yeah, we believe in reincarnation, but we also put up a Christmas tree, but don't do the like religious part of Christmas. But we also celebrate Eid al-Adha, but I don't really know why. But we don't do Ramadan. So I don't know. So that's the extent of what I can say. It's more of like a minority sort of insular community that only like stays within that community, at least in Lebanon. And Yeah, it's just I can't really say much religiously. I don't know that much about it, but I can just say it's more of like a minority community based around not really like religious elements other than just, oh, we're all Druze. Um, that said, I can't speak to, I know there's Druze in Syria, there's Druze in Palestine, many who have Israeli citizenship. And a lot of this community is specifically kind of loyal to whatever state they're in a way, or their communal leadership. So you'll see that the Druze in Palestine, a lot of them serve in the Israeli army, which is really unfortunate. But then there are others who refuse to. And Israel has created a situation where they actually give them more money in their municipalities, depending on how many of them serve in the army. And they kind of indoctrinate them to believe that they're their own ethnic group. In Syria, they stayed pretty loyal to the state throughout the Syrian civil war, because those who would have taken over had the government fallen in Syria, or would have treated them very badly because they are a minority sect. But they also have had clashes with the government in Syria as well. So, and then in Lebanon, they're most of the Druze community, I haven't polled them, but I would say, just based on what I know from my own experiences, I would say over half of them and the majority of them support the communal leader, Walid Jumblat, in Lebanon. But then at least a quarter of them don't, and a quarter of them actually are very like pro-resistance and support secular parties.
Got it. So talk about Lebanon. I feel, though, that Lebanon is a misunderstood country altogether, especially what's going on now. I think, there's a lot of confusion. I mentioned this in another podcast where I had somebody say, can you believe Lebanon attacked Israel for no reason? And I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
Right.
Or victim
So
Israel.
can you just, yeah. Well, can you just talk about the details of Lebanon, their politics, and just hopefully educate the audience a little bit on it?
So Lebanon can seem really complex, right? Because with Palestine, it's so straightforward for a lot of people. It's very black and white, like settler colonialism. Israel showed up, did the Nakba, ethnically cleansed everyone, and it's been doing that until this day, right? And like just taking more territory, killing Palestinians. It is, and Palestine is quite black and white, whereas Lebanon is a country recognized by the UN. It has a government, and the government is made up of different political parties, some of whom are pro-resistance, some of whom are anti-resistance and pro-US, and even pro-Israel. And so Lebanon can seem like a really complex place. So I'm going to try to simplify something that is a bit complicated, but not with respect to Israel. When we talk about Israel and its introduction into the region, it was happening at a time when there was a French mandate over Lebanon, right? Like Palestine had the British mandate because the British and French feel entitled to other parts of the world, as colonizers do. And they drew borders and split up countries. And the French took Lebanon and the British took Palestine before it was given to the Zionists. Well, Lebanon was supposed to be, there was people in Lebanon who were working with the French to make it a Christian country, like in the kind of image of Israel as a Jewish country. So you would have these sectarian states. But a lot of Lebanese didn't agree with that because not all of Lebanon is Christian. Lebanon has so many different sects in it. There's even different kinds of Christians in Lebanon. There's Maronite Christians, there's Orthodox Christians. There's also Druze in Lebanon. There's Shia Muslims, there's Sunni Muslims. There's Armenians in Lebanon. Like there's so many different kinds of people. It's a very diverse country in that respect. And so that didn't work out so well. But from Israel's introduction into the region, there was violence by the Zionists against Lebanon. In fact, their project of Greater Israel, they wanted a huge chunk of southern Lebanon, which is where many Lebanese Shias live. But there's also Christian villages, even Druze villages in the south of Lebanon. But it's majority Lebanese Shia. And so for a long period of time, the south of Lebanon, there was always an attempt by the U.S. and the Israelis to create a pro-Israel government in Beirut, using that sort of like those feudal lords that ruled over Lebanon before the French mandate period. But it didn't really work out because there was always resistance from the people on the ground in Lebanon up through the Civil War, I'd even say, because Israel used to just come into Lebanon whenever they felt like it, kill whoever they wanted, take whatever they wanted, and then leave. And then you also had a Palestinian refugee crisis in Lebanon, because one thing about the Nakba in 1948 is that, and then again in 1967, but in 1948, it created this massive refugee crisis where all these Palestinians ended up having to go to Gaza or to Lebanon or to other parts of the region. But you had all these Palestinians forcibly, ethnically cleansed from their homes in Palestine, living in Lebanon. And then, of course, like any people in the world would, they started to organize to take their land back. And some of that organization happened in Lebanon. And I mean, armed struggle to take their land back. And so that's how you had the PLO ending up in Lebanon. And so a lot of the Lebanese civil war got started by the US and Israel and France supporting and arming fascists, sectarian fascists in Lebanon to try to work with the Israelis to eradicate Palestinian armed resistance and allied Arab leftist militias that were working with them at the time. And ultimately, it did create a civil war situation in Lebanon for like 15 years. And in that time, Israel invaded Lebanon repeatedly. The worst of it came in 1982 when they imposed a siege on Beirut and killed tens of thousands of people in the process. And then they ended up actually invading, like coming up to Beirut, even to my village, by the way. The Israelis occupied my grandmother's home and behaved in a really disgusting manner, as they do. But the worst of it was in the south, where they ended up staying and occupying for 15 years. And because of that brutal occupation, you had the rise of Hezbollah in the mid-1980s as a resistance force against the Israelis, and they managed to kick the Israelis out in 2000. And then again in 2006 when the Israelis invaded. And then now we're seeing them try to do it now. As for politics in Lebanon, you have many different political parties that are run by a lot of the warlords from the Civil War. They put down their guns and they put on suits. The Lebanese system is a sect-based system because of what the French set up and what came into being after the Civil War to give everybody power to try to avoid civil war again. But of course, just kind of reproduces a system of clientelism on a sect-based level, and also leads to a potential civil war at any time. So in Lebanon, you have a system where the president is supposed to be Maronite Christian, the prime minister is to be Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament is to be Shia Muslim. And there are people from different parties that represent these sects, not the entire sect, but like you have people who represent specific parts of each sect that run these political parties. And there's two blocks. There's the pro-resistance bloc and the anti-resistance bloc. And then that's a very simple way to put it, but I'm just trying to make it easier to understand. And in the pro-resistance bloc is Hezbollah as a political party, as well as their allies like the Free Patriotic Movement, which is a Christian party, as well as different like smaller kind of like there's a Sunni Muslim party in there. There's another Christian party called Medada that is in alliance with Hezbollah. These people make up the majority of the members of parliament. So the resistance bloc has been democratically elected to represent the majority of the Lebanese government. And then there's the anti-resistance bloc with a few people in it that kind of go either way depending on who seems like they're going to win sometimes. I would say Willy Jim-Bluth is that kind of person. He heads the Progressive Socialist Party, which is neither progressive nor socialist. But it's basically like he's the sort of a Druze feudal leader of Lebanon. And he's a powerful figure because he can be a kingmaker sometimes. And he sways back and forth like in a kind of strategic way, depending on who he thinks is going to win. So sometimes he might be in the US camp. Sometimes he'll talk like he's in the resistance camp, but for the most part, he's been in the anti-resistance camp. And then you have parties like the Lebanese Forces and Kataib, which used to be, or still are, basically like these sectarian Maronite Christian militias who committed horrific massacres during the Civil War. They're completely in bed with the U.S. They want to normalize with Israel. And they basically don't even see the south of Lebanon as part of Lebanon. They just want to give it to Israel. Let them occupy it and let Lebanon be a Christian country so we can get rid of all these Shias. They're explicitly sectarian. And now it's getting really complicated because I've told you like 1,000 different pieces of information. I'm going to stop there in case it's too confusing. And please feel free to ask for any clarification.
No, this all actually makes a lot of good sense, and I appreciate the information. I think one thing that really stuck out the most to me, rather, is the fact that Hezbollah hasn't always been around. Hezbollah is not, quote unquote, a terrorist organization. Hezbollah was a response to an Israeli aggression, correct?
Yeah. So I also want to just say, like, Hezbollah. So there's something to understand about Lebanon specifically is that the Arab left was destroyed in Lebanon by the people the U.S. backed during the Lebanese Civil War. And at that time, it was like the sort of dying down of the Soviet Union, which had supported a lot of these sort of like left groups around the world, but no longer did, especially throughout the 80s as it was like coming close to its collapse. And then you also had the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran, which played a huge role in galvanizing people around like religious, like revolutionary religiosity, if you will. And it's in that, and then also was supporting people around the region who were basically like who they saw as their partners. And so you have the rise of Hezbollah in the mid 80s that is very much inspired by the Iranian Revolution, but is also just Lebanese people like fighting to protect their land. Like Israel was stealing their land. It was backing proxy groups, specifically the South Lebanon Army, which was just like a fascist pro-Israel army that tortured and killed people on Israel's behalf. And it was, the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon was so brutal. There were so many massacres. So it's only natural that people from the land are going to rise up against this invader and try to kick them out by any means necessary. And they will take weapons from whoever will give them weapons. So they did. They absolutely took weapons from Iran, as a lot of resistance groups across the region who are fighting for their very survival have. But because of their relationship with Iran, they are often referred to in Western media as being Iranian proxies. In fact, by the most sectarian, racist people in Lebanon, they're basically just called Iranians because they're Shia. They associate being Shia with being Iranian because that's like the anti-Shia propaganda that we've had pushed down our throats in the region for the last 15 years. But all that said, Hezbollah is also a political party, right? And it entered politics in 2005 specifically to protect its weapons, because even after they kicked the Israelis out, the Israelis still want to take land and occupy land and settle land. They are a settler, colonial, expansionist state with genocidal aims. And even kicking them out of southern Lebanon, they're going to come back with a vengeance. So the problem in Lebanon is that it has a very weak state intentionally. And the Lebanese army, which does exist, is blocked by the U.S. from accessing weapons to defend the country, which most people don't know about, because what you'll hear from U.S. officials is that Hezbollah should disarm and let the Lebanese army protect Lebanon. Absolutely. I would love for Lebanon to have an army that can protect all of Lebanon. The problem is, Lebanon is not allowed to have an army that protects all of Lebanon. The Lebanese army, you can go look at WikiLeaks cables. The U.S. has actively blocked the Lebanese army the Lebanese government from purchasing, for example, Russian weapons for Lebanon. What the Lebanese army gets is hand-me-down helicopters and night vision goggles from the U.S. You can't fight Israel that has nuclear weapons and 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs with a bunch of old AK-47s and like night vision goggles that are broken. That is what the Lebanese army has. That is why, as Israel's invading, what do you see the Lebanese army doing? You see them withdrawing from their posts because they don't have the equipment to fight Israel. I really wish they did, and they have every right to. Lebanon also is blocked from accessing air defense systems. So they're just naked. Lebanese people are just nakedly exposed to Israel's U.S. supplied bombardments. So it's like the situation where they say these things. Yes, the Lebanese army, you shouldn't have armed militias. Sure. But what else is Lebanon supposed to do in this situation? If Hezbollah puts down their weapons, you think Israel's just going to stop bombing Lebanon? I also want to remind people that in the early 1980s, when the PLO was forced to leave Lebanon, they had to go to Tunisia. That was a surrender, right? What happened after the PLO left? Israel oversaw a Lebanese fascistic massacre of 3,000 women and children, mostly, in the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps in Beirut. That is what happened. Surrendering to Israel is not a choice for people. Surrender means certain death. They will come and kill you anyway. So it is completely absurd to sit there and act like Hezbollah, if they just put down their weapons. So the idea here is to tell you that Hezbollah entered Lebanese politics with the sole mission of protecting their ability to maintain their weapons. And that's the reason they're popular, by the way. There's lots of criticism of how Hezbollah governs. They don't do enough. They didn't do anything about corruption. Fine. That's all a great debate to have. And people make very good arguments for that, for sure. Like Hezbollah is not some like socialist organization where I think they have like a great ideas for how to deal with Lebanon's economy. That said, as an anti-imperialist, the primary contradiction is imperialism. You cannot develop your country and develop your economy if somebody is stepping on your neck. And the US and Israel have been stepping on Lebanon's neck. And the only defense Lebanon has is this group called Hezbollah.
I had no idea about the Lebanese military not having access to weapons. They made it seem like they were just retreating out of fear. You know,
They are, because they can't defend themselves. They are scared.
Yeah.
And Israel's killing them,
Yeah.
by the way. Israel's killing them. The Lebanese
Yeah,
army.
yeah. But they're retreating because they don't have the weapons and to protect themselves, essentially. So how is Hezbollah able to get weapons, but the Lebanese army isn't?
Because
Is there a way around it?
No, so Hezbollah is allied with Iran, and Iran has supplied it with weapons. And Hezbollah has also manufactured its own weapons. And honestly, like, books will be written about this, when it comes to Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever groups are fighting Israel. They are up against the most powerful, most well-equipped army in the region, equipped by the most powerful country in the world. And Hezbollah specifically has managed to build weapons in a country that is under constant monitoring by the US. They've also managed to build an underground system of like tunnels and mountains where they can store a lot of those weapons. So some of them are above ground, some of them are below ground. I mean, the ingenuity of that as an organization under sanction in a country that has CIA all over it. Like there's the US embassy in Lebanon is basically a military compound, and they're building a new one that's like several $billion. It costs several $billion, and it's supposed to be even more massive and have like its own runway to land on in Lebanon. So Lebanon is totally constantly being monitored by the US and other European countries, yet Hezbollah's managed to collect a lot of weapons, and partly it's because of Syria. Not partly, largely it's because of Syria. Syria is like a way to move weapons to Lebanon. It's pretty basic and everybody knows it. And that's why you have the Israelis every so often bombing Syria, because they're bombing trucks that they believe have weapons in them. And this is one of the reasons there was such a horrific and deadly and violent war on Syria that Israel participated in to try to collapse the state. I mean, you can say what you want about Syria. People have lots of fair criticisms. I'm not, on here to defend the actions of the Syrian government, but there is no question that there was a U.S. Gulf state Israeli war on Syria, a proxy war on Syria that armed and funded a collection of what would only be considered anywhere else in the world terrorist groups to basically collapse the state, to get rid of a government that's in what's called the resistance axis. It didn't work, but they spent 10 years trying to do it, and they killed a lot of Syrians in the process and caused a civil war that left so much damage on Syria. And now Syria is sort of fractured, and the U.S. is occupying part of it. But one of the aims of that war was to get rid of a country that allowed for a group like Hezbollah to have the weapons it has.
So I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this question. Is the U.S. supporting Israel, or is Israel a proxy for the U.S.?
That's a great question. I think that, so my personal opinion, because of how I ideologically see the world and what I think is to be accurate, is that Israel is a proxy of the U.S. Does that mean everything Israel does is exactly what the U.S. wants? Not necessarily, but Israel is a U.S. military base in the region. Israel was created as a European imperialist colonial outpost to control a very resource-rich region of the world, and that has all kinds of waterways for transport, all kinds of oil. The Middle East is hugely geostrategically important for imperialism. I mean, I think a simple way to understand imperialism is just how capitalism is organized on a world scale, and you have a handful of very wealthy countries that are only wealthy because they looted most of the third world and stole their resources, and they have created a system in the world to continue to do that to this day. And so Israel's role in the Middle East is to help control this region of the world, to make sure it's policed, to get rid of any resistance to stealing its resources and any resistance to stealing its land, because land is resource. And it's been a huge investment as a result. And it works. It's not just in the Middle East, by the way. The U.S. has used Israel to do a lot of its dirty work in other parts of the world, too. In Africa, for example, or even in Latin America. I mean, during all those dirty wars across Latin America in the 1980s, when there was weapons embargoes on certain countries that had like fascist militias in them trying to kill off anything that seemed like socialist or communist or just progressive enough to try to protect its sovereignty, Israel would go in and arm certain fascists that the U.S. couldn't. And they were doing this in partnership together. But specifically in the Middle East, I mean, Israel has fractured the region, and it has basically acted as a force to destroy anything that stands in the way of U.S. interests, whether it's the PLO, whether it's Hamas, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's Iran, anything that stands in the way of having total U.S. domination of this region. The U.S. likes to act, the Biden administration likes to act like, no, like Netanyahu is just crazy. We have no control over him. But then if you just wait a few months, you'll see privately they're actually encouraging all of this. They're happy with all of this. Even the recent escalation in Lebanon. This is an opportunity. The U.S. is a huge opportunity to get rid of one of the biggest adversaries in the region, which is Hezbollah. That's what's happening right now. They're letting Israel do the dirty work for them and then acting hands off while still supplying them with weapons. And Iran is the ultimate biggest enemy of the U.S. And at the end of the way, they see Hamas and they see Hezbollah as proxies of Iran. They see the Yemenis as proxies of Iran. So let Israel deal with it. Let Israel be the big bad guy, and we'll just sit back and watch and see how it plays out. I think Israel is definitely the proxy of the U.S. Would the U.S. prefer the Israelis didn't express their genocidal intent so publicly? Yeah, probably. Would they prefer if they had the face of a liberal-seeming person rather than like a Ben-Gvir or Bezalel Smotrich type figure? Sure, I think that Biden's administration would prefer that. Do they care? No, they don't care. They don't care.
Yeah.
They really don't.
So is it reductive then to just simply say the U.S. wants the genocide to occur in Palestine and the U.S. wants Israel to attack Lebanon in order to remove Hezbollah? They are in complete control and gave a stamp of approval, and that is what they want done.
I mean, do they want the genocide in Gaza? I think, here's how I see it. I think that October 7th represented a huge threat to the global north in the sense that you had a military campaign launched by this group called Hamas of Palestinians operating out of a prison camp, basically. And it ended up being a really successful military campaign, I think, beyond what even Hamas expected. I mean, there was a lot of lies told to make it sound like it was just the most horrific thing ever, when now we know that Israel instituted the Hannibal Directive and probably killed a lot of its own people. We know that the mass rapes, the blood libel, the Jim Crow lynching blood libel of Palestinians committing mass rapes on October 7th never happened. And we know that it was actually an attack on Israeli military installations that, because Israel was not as prepared and powerful as we all thought, was a lot easier to do than anybody anticipated. And I think that's really scary. It's really scary when you're Joe Biden or Jake Sullivan or, Brett McGurk or Ursula von der Leyen or Joseph Borrell. It's really scary when you have a group of brown people militarily firing back at what is considered the West. Israel's considered the West, and exacting casualties. So you have to do everything in your power to basically teach a lesson, not just to Palestinians, but to the rest of the world, that we will absolutely not allow this. Like, we're going to literally commit a genocide. We're going to destroy the entire international order that we're always trying to protect to make sure that nobody in the global South gets any inspiration or ideas about what they might be able to do to basically take back control of their countries, of their land from this rotten imperialist system. I understand there's an Israel lobby. I'm not denying that there's an Israel lobby that absolutely polices U.S. politicians and academics and institutions in a really vicious way. They even try to police the UN. They even attack the UN. And I understand that exists. I'm not pretending it doesn't. Obviously, there are some disagreements between the Israelis and the Americans to some degree. But at the end of the day, I do see the Israel lobby as an extension of the military-industrial complex. It's just like on Russia-Ukraine. If anybody, when it comes to the U.S. demand to constantly supply Ukraine with like an endless amount of weapons to just keep this war with Russia going on forever, literally to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, right? They use Ukrainians as cannon fodder against a U.S. adversary. They don't actually care about Ukrainians. Just like if anybody speaks out or questions the narrative around that. Maybe NATO is being a little aggressive. Like any of these sorts of things, you see suddenly a campaign of silencing, of canceling, of the same sorts of things with the Israel lobby. So I see it in much of the same camp as that. You know what I mean? As a part of trying to police any opposition to imperialism. That is the Israel lobby's role, for the most part. So I do think it is the U.S. in the driver's seat. I do think they're absolutely fine with this genocide. They don't care. They don't care if Israel resettles Gaza. What do they care? They want Hamas to be destroyed. They see destroying Hamas as weakening Iran. They see destroying Hezbollah as weakening Iran. They see destroying Syria as weakening Iran. So why not? And let Israel do it. And we'll just sit here and say, oh, please stop, starving people as much. But also, we're not going to do anything to stop it because we really don't care.
But haven't they learned that it's not going to work?
You would think, I wouldn't underestimate American arrogance and hubris. The same mentality of Condoleezza Rice in 2006 talking about the birth pangs of a new Middle East, the same mentality of all the neocons in the Bush administration who thought that they could take out Saddam Hussein and reshape the whole Middle East, and look where we are now. They did actually reshape the Middle East, just not in the way that they were expecting. So I think that they're high on fake victory. They think that destroying buildings and killing civilians, they think genociding people is some sort of victory. Are they doing a lot of damage? Absolutely. Are they ultimately going to weaken Hamas and Hezbollah? I mean, they are weakened. There's no question they're weakening them. They'll never destroy them. They'll never destroy resistance to their dominance. They just won't. If anything, they have more people committed to it and more people willing to die for it than ever before. And we're very early into this. We don't know the repercussions of all this. And not only that, it's not even just the Middle East. They're turning the entire world against them. People in America are majority for a ceasefire and increasingly support an arms embargo on Israel. And you walk around the U.S., now that I'm here right now, you walk around and you're just kind of like, wow, no one really seems to care about what's happening because it doesn't affect them. But they're still against the kill. They don't like what they're seeing in their social media feeds. And that's the U.S., the most docile, the most I would say the most pacified people in the world, probably. I think that the U.S. population is so pacified. We see constant protests in the most pacified place in the world. You multiply that by 1,000 across Latin America, across Africa, and across Asia, except for maybe India. India's a little different. That's a different story. But the point is that the world is disgusted and horrified by what they're seeing. They feel helpless to stop it. But the damage this is doing to the U.S., to Israel, and to the Europeans is, we're not even going to know the extent of it for years to come. But they're creating an entirely different world order that is going to have them on the losing end, ultimately.
Yeah. I mean, this is how empires go down, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you believe the U.S. knew about the pager attack before it occurred?
I don't know about that, actually. I mean, look, I only know whatever because I've just read about it in the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. And you never know with what U.S. officials and Israelis are leaking to media. You never know how true it is or how not true it is. But from what's been reported, it sounds like not even the entire Israeli intelligence and defense establishment knew this was even an option. It was a very top secret operation of terrorism. They had waiting to use it when it seemed like the right time. That said, the U.S. wasn't upset with it. They were like, this is great. You saw the reaction. They were like, it's ingenious. Wow, Israel's so innovative. Terrorism is so innovative. Amazing. So whether they knew about it or not doesn't matter because they were fully in support of it.
Can you talk about the extent of how nefarious the whole attack was? I mean, it went off, I think it was 3:30. Whoever was around, it didn't matter. Kids, children, women, whatever it may be. Can you just kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so it was these pagers that were basically handed out to again, Hezbollah is a political party, right? It's only the U.S. classifies as terrorists, by the way. The Europeans actually do. Maybe Germany does too, but who cares about Germany? They're still Nazis as far as I'm concerned. But no, I mean, even the Europeans deal with Hezbollah's political party. They don't have them classified as terrorists. Well, Hezbollah has a political party that serves in government. They serve their community. In Lebanon, it's a sect-based system. So the political parties they operate social services for their community, right? So in the areas where Hezbollah's been elected, they operate social services, and they basically had these pagers handed out to people who are part of Hezbollah and a part of civil administration. So it wasn't just like fighters walking around with these pagers, although even that would be terrorism, by the way, because they essentially turned people into human bombs that could go off anywhere, at a grocery store, at the doctor's office, at home with their kids, which actually happened. 3,000 people were injured in this attack. And they basically put some sort of like powder, some explosive powder in the battery of these pagers that they got Hezbollah to buy. Somehow, this is according to the Israelis, they managed to like recruit someone to think that this was a pager that existed for some Taiwanese company. They got the Taiwanese company to start selling it, but they were actually manufactured by the Mossad. And of course, Hezbollah is getting these pagers because the idea of these pagers is that they can't be hacked. But so the Mossad manufactured them, put this powder substance in the next to the battery, so that even if you put it was so little that even if you put it in an x-ray machine, which Hezbollah did x-ray them, you wouldn't see anything weird about these pagers. Sure. And then they could somehow use the battery to make them go off remotely whenever they felt like it. And when the pagers did go off, to cause maximum damage to the person using the pager, it'd send a message that you had to like use both your hands to push the button, see what it said, and then it would explode so that you'd have it to your face and you'd have both your hands on it. And the Israelis were really proud of that because just so ingenious, so innovative. And then for people who didn't check the pager and do that to see the message, it would go off anyway a minute later. So that's what happened. And it maimed a lot of people. People lost their eyes. They lost their hands. It's actually horrific what they did. And if that had been done to like off-duty Israeli soldiers who were just like at home with their kids or teaching at school, all Israeli adults are basically reservists of a certain age. So are you saying that you can just turn any of them into a human bomb and you're going to say it's okay and you're going to say it's ingenious and innovative, or are you going to call it what it is, which is actual terrorism? And it was really shocking because it's like that started one shock after another. The next day it was walkie-talkies. Days later, they flattened a few buildings in Dahieh, the southern part of Beirut. Days later, they launched their horrific air campaign, carpet bombing campaign against southern Lebanon that killed 500 people in a day. It was one of the most intense, aside from Gaza, like explosive attacks on anywhere ever. And then a few days later, they dropped 85 2,000-pound U.S.-supplied bunker buster bombs and destroyed 6 residential buildings on South Beirut to kill Hassan Nasrallah. And it was just, and since then, this is what Palestinians have been dealing with for the past year. It's like you don't even have time to process what happened the day before something else horrific happens. And I've been doing that from the U.S. I can't imagine being there right now. I mean, all my friends there are completely traumatized at the moment. They've lost their homes, or if they haven't lost their homes, they're just like their houses are shaking from the bombings. It just gets worse and worse. I mean, last night they threatened a hospital in South Beirut and then bombed another one instead and killed like 17 people. And it's just normal now. This is the world we live in. This is the world that Israel and America are creating. A world where hospitals are bombed every day. There's no more in Gaza. Every hospital in Gaza has been destroyed. And people are okay with
and they're
that.
not denying it. And they're not denying it. They're absolutely good. Yeah. Can you just speak a little bit to, again, because I believe I have a lot of Lebanese friends. A lot of them, they're misunderstood a lot of times just about the country in general. Can you just speak to the beauty of the Lebanese people, the spirit of the Lebanese people, the resilience of the Lebanese people?
I am completely biased for the Levant. I think the Levant is like an amazing region. I think we have the best food. And I mean Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, just the region as a whole. When I talk about that, like all these places are basically cut up and divided by these colonial borders that were imposed on us. But when I see Palestine, I see my people. When I see Syria, I see my people. They sound like me. They look like me. They eat like me. Like, these are my people. This is all our land. And it was chopped up. It's like my dad's older than the state of Israel. And he was born in 1941. He's older. And he remembers like when he was 9 years old, not 9 years old. No, when he was younger than 9 years old, because 1940, his dad used to take a train from Beirut to Jaffa to get oranges. Like, it's like Maryland, Virginia, like I don't know, DC area. It's like this. These are all not different. They're just different. Like, yeah, they're different geographical locations that do have things specific to them. But at the end of the day, it's all kind of the same. And it's amazing. I mean, Lebanon specifically, which is so similar to Palestine, it's a coastal country. So it's on the coast. It's like the beaches are amazing. You've got rocky beaches with beautiful, like see-through blue water. And you've got sandy beaches in the south with like the most beautiful. I mean, one of my favorite beaches in all of Lebanon is in Sumud, or as many people call it, Tyre, which is being bombed by Israel right now. But God, the coast is gorgeous. And I'm certain, I've never been to it, but I'm certain the coast of Palestine is just as gorgeous. No wonder Europeans wanted to steal it because it's so beautiful. Lebanon also has amazing mountains where my family's from the mountains, where it's like just gorgeous, like gorgeous valleys and beautiful heights and beautiful views and beautiful restaurants and beautiful scenery and just like beautiful people, these old stone houses that were built by like generations ago that like families just keep building on. And then Israel just wipes them out. Like this fake country that's not even as old as my dad comes and drops bombs on 200-year-old houses. It's crazy that were built by like people's blood and sweat and tears, you know? They will rebuild them, by the way. No, Lebanon's amazing. I mean, everybody, it's such a cliche, but yeah, you can go to the beach and then you can go skiing in the same day. That is true about Lebanon because it's got like a very diverse geography. It's also got like a sort of like really cool wineries. Lebanon has great wineries, beautiful wineries. God, Lebanon is just, I live there because I love it. Like there's something so charming about it. And I actually had a friend who her family's from the coast of Palestine, but was kicked out in 48. And now like lives in the West Bank. So she'd only ever been to the West Bank. And when she came to Lebanon, she was like, so this is what like Palestine would be like if it was still ours. It would, because, you know, like it's just like a Levantine place with Arabs on the coast. That's Lebanon. It's like amazing. It's full of a lot of drama and full of a lot of passion and full of a lot of fighting sometimes to our own fault and sometimes through no fault of our own. But it's a really amazing place with so much potential. And there's a reason so many people fall in love with it. It's also a very diverse place. Like I'm, you know, not that I should have to justify Lebanon's existence because Westerners can relate to it, but I got really frustrated because there was some jerk in the UK who's just like an Islamophobe who was like, here's a photo of Lebanon before Hezbollah took over. And it was like a bunch of women in bikinis on the beach. And I'm like, dude, that's still what Lebanon looks like. Like, what the hell are you talking about? It's just, on the beaches of Lebanon, people are dressed just like in Miami. Not that I should even have to say that to humanize people, but I think that actually, if your typical American went to like Lebanon versus Israel, they would have more fun in Lebanon. I actually have no doubt about that. Israel, I've never been to this place that calls itself Israel because I don't think they'd let me in. And also I'm Lebanese and Israel and Lebanon are technically at war. So it's like for security reasons, I should not go there. But from what I've seen, it looks like a really fascist society full of really horrible genocidal people that are probably not very fun unless you don't understand the genocide they're talking about. And that if you are a few shades darker than them, they'll probably not be very nice to you. Lebanon's really fun. It's a really fun, lovely place. And I know journalists, all these Western correspondents, they prefer to be in Beirut over Jerusalem, over West Jerusalem, because the people are just better, because they're not a genocidal, psychopathic settler society that wants to kill anybody who isn't like them. So yeah, Lebanon's an awesome place. And I'm just so devastated to watch all these places I know get destroyed. And I've been just devastated for a year over Gaza and just over everything happening in Palestine. But to see it happen to like your own home, it just adds a level of horror to it that you can't really understand unless you're from there. And yeah, so now I'm just like, I don't know how Palestinians have done this for a year. I really don't.
I got to ask you, have you ever thought about being a professor or teaching anything?
I don't think I'd be allowed to.
I mean, you're dropping so much knowledge here. I just want to just sit back and listen to everything. It's phenomenal.
Well, you're really sweet. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. So, I mean, part of that too is asking the next question, because I think you have a pretty good amount of knowledge than most people around Syria. You don't have to go as in depth as you did with Lebanon, but can you describe the situation in Syria? And I also recognize that you receive some criticism, which clearly you are impervious to any criticism. You don't care. You just keep going straight forward. Much respect for that. But can you walk us through the situation in Syria and then where you were criticized as well?
Yeah, Syria is another complicated country.
Yes.
But I'm not going to go too deep into history because I'm not going to pretend to sit here and be like an expert on Syria's entire history, but I can start from the last 15 years because it's a country that has a government that has been very critical of the US, has refused to abide by whatever the US wants. And for that, it has been under the threat of the US for a very long time. Not a perfect country, not a perfect government. I have my criticisms. My family has their criticisms. Syria occupied Lebanon for a lengthy period of time. They did some not so great things in Lebanon for a lengthy period of time. But that said, just like with Saddam Hussein of Iraq, we can sit here and criticize him a lot. I still don't agree with the U.S. overthrowing a government and collapsing a state in the Middle East. And that is the position I take on Syria. And in 2011, there was an uprising in Syria, much like the rest of the region, that started out with some good sentiments, right? Like people have a right to demand better from their government, more from their government. And that's what happened in Syria. But like most things in the region, the U.S. will not let an opportunity be missed. And the U.S. and its partners in the region got involved and backed some nefarious actors in Syria to do some damage. So you had kind of like two things going on. You had like maybe people like us that would be like protesting for more freedoms, a little less of a police state, maybe just like the things that we want to make our country better. And then you had some other groups of people that wanted something very different in Syria and were happy to work with the U.S. and various Gulf states and take money and weapons from them to try to impose and make that happen. And that's where you had the rise of Al-Qaeda linked groups in Syria, especially later, as early as late 2011, by the way, that was happening. And so Syria very quickly turned into a pretty brutal war between the government and between these various armed groups that were trying to collapse the government on behalf of outside actors that you could really only refer to as proxies. I'm not sitting here and absolving them of every bad thing they did. I'm not sitting here to be the Syrian government's lawyer at all, but I am American. And I don't like when my money is going to destroy and collapse states that have deep, rich histories in the region. Ultimately, because of what was happening in Iraq and as well at the time, you had the rise of not just Al-Qaeda groups in Syria that were getting funding and arms from many Gulf states, but also of ISIS, which broke off from Al-Qaeda in Iraq and took over large swaths of Syria. And then you had Russia get involved because Russia has a close relationship with Syria. They didn't want to see another Arab state collapse. It was ruining security in the region. And Russia has its own interests and its own agenda in Syria as well. I'm not going to pretend the Russians are some lovely people who just want to come and be a humanitarian organization or anything like that. But that's the reality of the situation. And then it became more dangerous because you had the potential for a war between Russia and the U.S. in Syria. Hezbollah got involved in Syria in 2013. Hezbollah got involved for two reasons, or maybe you could say three reasons. Hezbollah got involved initially to protect some Shia shrines in Damascus that these Salafi jihadist groups that the Gulf states and the U.S. were arming and funding were attacking. And it's a really important shrine for Shia Muslims. So they went to go protect that shrine. They also went to go protect certain areas of Syria that had been taken over by ISIS, where nuns, by the way, had been taken hostage. And they freed those nuns. They also were protecting the border of Lebanon because these groups were trying to come into Lebanon, and they actually did. And it became a security threat to Lebanon. You had bombs going off, ISIS suicide bombers in Lebanon, specifically trying to kill Shias. So they had to protect their community in Lebanon, protect all Lebanese from the infiltration of these groups into Lebanon. And then also there was the protection of Syria as a state that's important to the resistance axis, which everyone recognizes. And you don't want the state to collapse and be taken over by a bunch of pro-US forces, because that would be a devastating blow to the resistance axis. So that's Hezbollah's involvement in Syria. And the war raged on. And at one point, you had Hillary Clinton running for president. And she said her first act as president would be a no-fly zone in Syria, which I found to be an incredibly dangerous prospect. I have family in Syria. They are from a minority sect that Al-Qaeda groups want to kill. I was very unhappy with the idea of the U.S. getting involved to help support the further rise of these groups that also, by the way, were getting help from the Israelis in the Golan Heights. I should just add that too, which there was actually, I went to Syria and interviewed some people who initially were with the armed groups in the Golan area on the Syrian side, but switched sides once they saw that the Israelis were helping them. Because if you're from the Golan, it's very difficult for you to do anything that benefits the Israelis because they're occupying half of your area. So anyway, I went to Syria because I thought Hillary Clinton was going to be president. I wanted to report from there. I had an opportunity to go with a delegation of Western correspondents from a lot of mainstream outlets. And I was viciously attacked for that. I was portrayed as an Assadist. Just the most horrific things were said about me. So it became very sectarian. And it was really upsetting too because it was Arabs who were attacking me. I was used to being attacked by Zionists, by like white people, by pro-Israel freaks. This was a time when I was getting attacked by the people who supported my stuff on Palestine, but were suddenly like, Rania is just a sectarian Druze. She hates Sunni. She wants them all to die. She loves Assad. Just like really disgusting stuff. That was the most upsetting part to me, is to be attacked by my own community for being opposed to U.S. intervention in a proxy war where they were destroying a country. Syria is not just Assad. Syria is a country of over 20 million people. And just because the ones in the diaspora with the biggest megaphones are telling you they want to destroy the country because they hate Assad, doesn't mean people there want you to collapse their state and overthrow their government. And they were suffering so much from these groups. I'm not denying if the Syrian government committed crimes, it was a war. I'm sure they did. But it was a war nonetheless with more than one side. And one of those sides, the reason this war was happening was because our country of the U.S. was funding and arming Salafi jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS to destroy a country with like 2,000 years of history. These people destroyed the old city in Aleppo. They blew it up. This place survived so many hundreds of years, but it couldn't survive U.S. proxy groups. And then after the war came to an end, because ultimately the Syrian government did succeed in the sense that it survived. The state survived, though it's incredibly weak and incredibly corrupt now, more than any time before, because it's been completely hollowed out by the U.S. and sanctions. There's these vicious starvation sanctions on Syria. And again, I'll get accused of being an Assadist because I don't think Syria should be sanctioned, because I don't think the U.S. has the right to sanction any country in the world. What gives you the right to starve people? Because that's what you're doing. You are starving people of electricity, of fuel, and of food, and of having a future. So as a result of these sanctions, Syrians don't have electricity. Life is very difficult in Syria right now. And again, 23 million people. Life is very difficult in this place. And there's people who want to say it's all Assad's fault. Okay, it's all Assad's fault. You want to take all the blame off the U.S. The U.S. has done nothing. Starving Syria has done nothing to make life hard for people. It's just this one guy. And if we get rid of him, everything's going to be great. Just like if we get rid of Saddam Hussein, Iraq's going to be great. Look at Iraq now. Is Iraq great? I'm not saying it would have been great if Saddam was around, but who are we to run around the world and pick off leaders that we don't like and destroy entire societies? Because that's what we tried to do to Syria. And I will always oppose that. Unapologetically, I will always oppose that.
Did you lose any work?
Oh yeah. I was completely ostracized and marginalized, and again, by my own community. It was really upsetting because it was like coming from other Arabs and Arab Americans. And I ultimately ended up getting a job with an outlet called Soapbox, which was like an arm of RT back in the day, because it was the only place that would hire me. And I made of it what I could. I really appreciate the fact that I got to work there. I learned so much about video and about how to present. And then everybody was like, oh my God, she's just like a Russian proxy. And I'm like, I can't get work anywhere else because I'm just an Assadist. So that was the position I was put in. But you know what? I don't have any shame about that because I needed work. And I was able to say whatever I wanted to at Soapbox, by the way. There was no restrictions on what I could say. I said whatever I wanted. I reported how I wanted. Nobody tried to control anything I said, not like these American media outlets. So that was an interesting experience. And ultimately, I ended up at Breakthrough News, which I'm so happy I have that platform because it's a completely independent media outlet. It's not attached to any state. It's completely supported by funders who like the work we do and listeners and viewers and all that sort of thing. and another place where I'm able to say the things I want to say without any restrictions, like you have at every other major media outlet. And I think that we've been able to be really impactful. But yeah, the Syria situation, it wasn't, but I don't want to make it about me, because I think the whole idea of the war with Syria is it split the region along sectarian lines like never before. And there was a lot of funding and propaganda that went into doing that. And it worked for a long period of time. And the afters of that are still there. There's still a lot of sectarian sentiment because of the propaganda that went into the war around Syria. And I think, though, Israel's undoing a lot of that right now with its genocide.
Do you still face criticism? Have people come around?
Yeah,
now?
I mean, yeah, a lot of people are like, whatever. Or they're like, oh, you were right. Or I think some people were just scared to be supportive at the time, because like when you see someone being trashed, I don't blame people. Like, if every day you go online and you see Rania's an Assadist, Rania's an Assadist, Rania's an Assadist, eventually you're going to be like, oh, she must be an Assadist. Like, whatever that means, by the way, because I don't know what it means to be an Assadist. Like, he hasn't written a book, I don't think. I feel like you have to write a book or have a philosophy to have an ism behind you. But regardless, like, no, but people have come around. And also, I think that, I think it's like...
So just to be clear, Rania is not writing a book about it. I just want to make sure.
I am not writing a book about it. No. I think that a lot went into fracturing people and distracting people from the fact that Israel is first and foremost our biggest problem in the region. Before anything else, before the problems with our local governments come into play, the first and foremost like enemy of life in the Middle East, of our ability to develop, is the Israelis and their American sponsors. And I think that that was a lot of this became a big distraction from that. Oh, Shias are the problem. Sunnis are the problem. Christians are the problem. All this stuff. Syria's the problem. Assad's the problem. I think Israel has reminded anybody who forgot or was a bit misled that before we can deal with any of these other issues, which by the way should be dealt with, right? Before we can do that, again, you got to get rid of that boot off your neck. And they're the boot on our necks. So
let me ask you something from a community perspective. There were many Palestinians that said Lebanese people didn't support Palestinians when the genocide first started. And then what happened with Lebanon, a lot of people were saying Palestinians are not speaking up for Lebanon, or those that were speaking up for Palestinians weren't speaking up for Lebanon. What do you say to those individuals? Because again, that's just a method of dividing and conquering.
I didn't even know that was being said. Actually, I've heard that. Yep. I mean, I think I'm sure there's probably Lebanese people who didn't say anything until their country was being bombed. That's probably the case, but it depends who you're talking about, right? Like, you want to talk about Lebanese people. I mean, Hezbollah on October 8th started firing missiles at Israeli military installations in solidarity with Palestine. So they count. They're Lebanese people. I don't know if we're talking about Lebanese people in Lebanon or Lebanese people in America.
Well, I think it was really across the religious divide, though. Right. A lot of people made it a Sunni versus Shia issue kind of thing and started to create a debate around that.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I would say it like this. Hezbollah is a Shia organization, and they were firing missiles at Israel in solidarity with Palestine. I mean, that's just a basic fact. Hamas and Hezbollah are like actively partners. They work together towards the same cause, right? Towards liberation of land, liberation of Palestine, and of anything else Israel occupies, and for hopefully the dismantling of this apartheid genocidal settler state. So I think that's as solidarity as it gets. And I think it's like silly to sit there and be like, oh, Lebanese people. Oh, I mean, look, there's people that I'm like, I haven't seen you say anything for a year, and now you're calling Israel and America enemies. My attitude towards that isn't to antagonize that person. I'm like, welcome to the resistance. Yeah. Welcome back. In some cases, welcome back, because some of these people like started to kind of turn on resistance for a while. But welcome back. This person remembers who the enemy is. We all need to be as unified as possible right now. I'm not going to sit here and have some, let alone, but not even a fight, a public fight. That's our dirty laundry. And there is some dirty laundry to talk about. And there's some Lebanese people who hate Palestinians. They killed them during Sabra and Shatila. We should have conversations about that. They are a problem. They're a problem in Lebanon. They're a problem here. They're the people who are working with, or like I don't know if you've heard of the American Task Force for Lebanon. No. It's like this lobbying group that's basically connected to the Lebanese forces, which is one of these fascistic political parties in Lebanon that participated in Sabra and Shatila. It's basically these rich Lebanese sectarian jerks who are thrilled that the U.S. killed Hassan Nasrallah and is carrying out a war to try and destroy Hezbollah right now. And they're the ones who keep meeting with Kamala Harris to say that, and that's what she's saying, the Lebanese community supports me. It's these people. They exist. They're my enemies. I don't see them as people who are on our side at all. And I'm happy to hear anybody criticize them. But I think we should be specific about who we're criticizing. Just like if we're talking about Palestine, I've seen nothing but solidarity from Palestinians for what's happening in Lebanon. I'm sad to hear if anybody's saying screw the Lebanese, because this is a part of the same fight. Like, our enemies are united. Our enemies are on the same page, on the same side. They support each other. They arm each other. They get together and try to destroy our careers and our livelihoods and try to silence us. If our enemies are united, we need to be united. We don't have a choice. And having petty side fights about who said what to who at what time, those are conversations we can have privately. Fine, we all need to vent. But at the end of the day, we need to be united. And I'm happy to be united with people who maybe 5 months ago were silent, but now they're saying the right things. Let's bring them into the fold.
Yeah, right on. I agree with you 100%. So just a few more questions, if that's okay. I just want to talk about the Piers Morgan interview with Emily, because Emily did take a shot at you with the pager attack. I remember. Yeah, the interview was before the pager attack.
Right, sorry.
Yeah, the way I viewed that is, you got to all of them. You broke them apart, and you basically live in their mind rent free. That's the way I took
that. I love that for them.
Yeah. But did you know going into the interview? I mean, I think you knew you were going to get some hostility, but did you know it was going to be? It was a coordinated attack. That's just the best way to describe it. Just really quick, just to share the folks that do the research with us here, in bold red letters, they would not let her talk. They were bullying her. This is such BS. And then
Okay, so I'll walk you through some of it because I think it's interesting. This whole Piers Morgan phenomena is like wild because it's clickbait. His show is basically a rhetorical boxing match, right? And it's obviously biased towards one side, very biased towards one side, but it's smart. It's smart as a host because it's basically like Jerry Springer, but for politics. So you bring people who basically hate each other and oppose each other, and you let them yell at each other. But you also specifically are on one side yourself, so you like go after that one person. They started reaching out to me like maybe a month or more before I actually went on, and I just wasn't available. And I also wasn't sure if I should do it because, we've all been watching Piers Morgan, and I see how they operate. They're very hostile. I know I'm going to get asked to condemn. But there's also, so a part of me was like, don't participate in this, right? Why? Why subject yourself to this, like, bullying and essentially like, for what? But I also recognize a huge viewership. Like, people watch this. I don't think I'm going to go on there and change anyone's mind, but it gives people, I think, at least for me, for example, like when I see people rhetorically punching Piers or those that he has on his show, it makes me feel good. So I'm like, okay, like maybe I can make people feel good. And there are some things I want to say. I went into it, actually, it was only Emily that was supposed to be on. It was supposed to be me, Piers, and Emily. So I came prepared for that. And then that morning they were like, oh, we're adding this other girl. And it was like this Iranian girl, Elika or something, who was Iranian diaspora, hates Iran, is basically trying to make herself famous off of being pro-Israel. It's quite a career move. And I'm like, man, like I'm like, okay, this is messed up. They're adding this person last minute, but all my talking points stay the same. My colleagues at Breakthrough helped me prepare, specifically Kay Pritzker. Shout out to Kay. Kay pretended to be a Zionist and grilled me. But no, there were some things I wanted to say. So I wanted to like just go on, make my points and get out of there. And also I kept telling myself, because I get really emotional, I was like, don't become the angry yelling person. Whatever you do.
Don't become the angry Arab.
Don't become
That's the way they try to portray
exactly.
us. Yeah.
So I was like, because it's when I get aggravated, it is really hard for me to stay calm. And it was like torture because they sent me this van. Like they send you this van. It's a studio in a van. And I couldn't see anybody. I could only hear them. So like, I'm just listening, and they subjected me to like in the middle of the panel, we had to listen to this like psychotic Israeli father of a hostage child who had been released and totally unharmed, by the way. And he was just saying the most insane stuff, the most insane lies. I feel like it was intended to make me explode. But yeah, I guess I just held my own. I tried to stay calm. I left thinking I did horribly. I was like, I totally screwed that up. Oh my God. And I felt totally surrounded. I was just being attacked by 3 different people at the same time. And then
Yeah.
I saw it and I was really happy with how it turned out because I was like, oh no, I prepared and I held my own and I'm never doing that again. And then I did it again.
Yeah. No, you definitely held your own. The optics weren't great for them, especially with Emily, a white lady, clearly white lady talking down to an Arab lady, right?
Yeah, she's like a
It just looked
Nazi. This woman's a Nazi. That's the thing is also, look, having been brought up, I would say, at the electronic intifada, I know how to talk back to Zionists. Like I have experience talking back to them, maybe not rhetorically at the same, like in the same moment on live, like air like that. But I do know everything they're going to say before they say it. There was one thing that caught me off guard. I was not expecting Piers Morgan at the end to be like, what about those Hamas billionaires? I was like, wow, that was not on my bingo card. So I got a little flustered with that because I was like, what? I didn't even expect that. But for the most part, we all know their talking points. Like, we know it better than they do. I could just do it for them, honestly, at this point. It's like just a matter of being able to respond to their talking points quickly. And it's the kind of show you definitely have to be in the right mindset for, definitely have to prepare for. Like they ask me to go on often and I don't because you have to like, it's like not something you can just do off the bat when it's like a hostile situation like that. If I was on the Zionist side, it'd be different. I could just go on and get a red carpet and be treated with kid gloves, but I'm not a Zionist. I told myself I'd only do it again if it was about Lebanon or if so horrific happened in Palestine. I just have to like, because I think they also have people on who are pro-Palestine, but also will condemn Hamas. And my thing is...
Wait, but that's what I want to get to. You're the only one, and I could be wrong, and I'm sorry for the audience or whoever if I'm getting this wrong. You're the only one that looked straight into the camera and said, I'm not condemning anybody.
Am I really?
I haven't, look, again, I haven't seen it. I was shocked because I was watching it. I was like, no way she said that. That was, gutsy.
I can't. Like, how am I going to condemn people who are fighting extermination? It's crazy. I wouldn't, and I specifically wanted to go on there. I knew I was going to be asked that question. And I specifically made the point, and I will make it a million times more. I will not condemn Hamas, just like I won't condemn a slave revolt, just like I won't condemn Jewish uprising during the Holocaust. There were so many Jewish uprisings during the Holocaust. There was one really cool one with Jewish Red Army soldiers. I can't remember the name of the camp, but it was Soviet Red Army soldiers who had been captured, who were Jewish, who were sent to a concentration camp. And they basically organized the other people in the concentration camp to do like a breakout. And they lured the Nazi soldiers into like the ones who like worked to move things around, like the concentration camp Jews who like worked to move things around. I can't remember exactly what, maybe food or equipment, lured these Nazi soldiers into this area and killed them with axes. Like we hear that story. None of us are going to sit there and condemn that. What? Of course they're going to kill Nazis with axes. They were in a concentration camp. Like naturally murdered babies in their cribs, the babies of plantation owners in their cribs. Nobody wants babies to be murdered. And Hamas didn't do that, by the way. But nobody looks back at Nat Turner's rebellion and condemns it. Like,
yeah, but this is a huge shift, though. We've always been conditioned to say, yeah, Hamas bad.
I still refuse. I will always refuse, especially to white people, especially to the oppressors. I am not going to condemn the people from my region who are fighting the most brutal, most morally depraved military in the world, who are exterminating them right now. Absolutely not will I condemn them. Hell no. Hell no. They have every right to break out of their concentration camp and fight their occupier. We can sit here and talk details about, oh my God, exactly what they're allowed to do and they shouldn't have done it this way or this way. Sorry, that's not real. That is a fake world. The only people having that conversation are privileged, comfortable people who want to sit there and pretend humanitarian law means anything. It means nothing. Israel is dropping bombs on buildings full of people. It drops bombs on schools. It drops bombs on hospitals. It is sniping children to death for fun. That is what their soldiers are doing. Do not sit here and try to make some like argument, not you, them. I can't take you seriously. I can't take you seriously if you're really going to look me in the eye and try to make some argument that Hamas did anything morally depraved on October 7th, as if Israel hasn't done a million times worse. And we can also, I also want to, I wish I had at the time, but it was just no time. We shouldn't even accept their narrative about October 7th. You don't have to love Hamas or love violence even. You can be opposed to violence and still accept the reality that October 7th was a military campaign. And also, why do Israelis live next to a concentration camp? Like, why are you hosting a concert next to a concentration camp where your country starves people? Does that mean I want violence to take place against you? No, I don't want anyone to be killed. I don't want anyone to be hurt. I don't like violence. I don't think anyone likes violence. If you read Yahya Sinwar's interviews, he doesn't like war either. You have just put this man and his community in a position where, just like any other human beings in the world, they're going to fight to not be stomped on. Like, it's not that hard to understand. And the fact that it's seen as some big like revelation or revolutionary act to not condemn it, which I'm happy to be that person. I'm really happy to be that person. I'll do it. But I want us all to get comfortable saying that, because we should not be condemning people who have nothing and whose lives are being stolen for fighting against that. They have every right to.
Again, much props to you. And I'm sure I'm going to be criticized because other people did say something similar, but nothing resonated as effective as the way you said it. So great work. And then the last question is just really the segue to Western media. I spoke to a colleague of mine. She does not want her name mentioned, but she said, Rania is the biggest threat to Western media. Wow. She is going to change the game.
Wow.
And this is a prominent individual.
Oh.
But they didn't want me to say their name.
Or man.
It's a girl.
Okay.
It's a girl. We'll just say it's a girl. Safe to say. Safe to say. So talk about what you're doing and the work that you're doing. Is it your motto? Don't just hate the media, replace the media?
That's our motto at Breakthrough News. I can't really take credit for it, but I love it. But yeah, it is. Don't just hate the media, replace the media. Look, I have so many friends who work in mainstream media and agree like with us, right? Like, they obviously know this is horrible. And I get it. People need jobs. They need to make money. They need to feed their families. I totally don't hold that against people at all. And I feel really privileged that, because there's not very many jobs in media, even in mainstream media. Like, people are being laid off all the time. So I know that I have a rare position in media in general, and in independent media specifically, where I have the support of my colleagues and the support of an outlet that gives me a platform to do what I do. And one of the biggest things that I do on my show, Dispatches, just a shout out to it, go check it out on Breakthrough News, is I specifically try to host other Arabs. I think lots of people know a lot about Palestine. I don't only host Arabs, but I just want to give a voice to people who are in Lebanon, in Palestine, those in the diaspora. We are experts on our region, and we're not given the opportunity to express our knowledge in mainstream media. We're pushed out of it, especially if we have revolutionary ideas, even more. So I try to use my platform to give a platform to those people, because they know way more than I do. And I love that I'm able to do that. And if that's a threat, so be it. I'm glad to be a threat, because I think that the genocide in Palestine has completely discredited the mainstream media on so many levels. And look, at Breakthrough, we don't just cover Palestine, right? Like, we cover Latin America, we cover Africa, we cover Asia from a global South anti-imperialist perspective with people from those regions, and giving a perspective that you don't see in the New York Times or the Washington Post. And I think what people are learning from Palestine is that they don't just lie about Palestine. They lie about everything. And they have these white people in charge of their bureaus, and they have completely biased opinions. Nothing to knock my white friends who have great revolutionary politics, but it's not like they've got some revolutionary white person leading the New York Times bureau in Jerusalem. They have these white people to police and gatekeep so that a specific narrative comes out that is against us and against the truth and against reality. And so I want to break through. I want to break through that. And I'm like really happy to so far be allowed to continue to do that at Breakthrough News. We're always at risk, of course, of being knocked offline at any time. Any of us could be. But in the meantime, we just do everything we can to try to promote the right voices and the right attitudes. And I'll just tell a little story. Like, it's not just that revolutionary politics aren't allowed. It's also who gets to say it. Again, I am happy if I see anybody who is advocating for our people in progressive outlets, mainstream outlets. It's fantastic. But I also still am stunned by the fact that there are so many Lebanese people and Palestinian people who speak fluent English, who are brilliant, who have expertise. They're journalists, they're academics, they've written books about these topics. And I still don't see them getting invited on and platformed where they should be. I still see certain people given priority over them, whether it's the Israeli perspective or whether it's just like some white person who lived in Beirut for a few months. Like it stuns me. It stuns me. So that's just to say, if anybody is looking for really amazing Lebanese people who are in Lebanon right now who can speak fluent English, come to me. I will give you a list. There's so many. There's so many. And I am really lucky and proud that I get to like platform those kinds of people.
So how do we watch you? How do we follow you?
So you follow Breakthrough News on YouTube, where I have a show that I host called Dispatches. I have like about 1 or 2 episodes a week. And you can also listen to it as a podcast on Spotify or iTunes or whatever you get podcasted. So Dispatches with Rania Khalek. You can also follow Breakthrough News at BT Newsroom on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. And you can also follow me at Rania Khalek. I'm mostly active on Twitter and Instagram.
You could just tell your voice pivoted to the news voice. For that.
Become a patron at patreon.com. I'm just
yes.
Give our little spiel.
There you go. Rania, it is an absolute privilege. I would love for you to come back again soon, if you're okay with it. Thank you so much.
This was such a wonderful interview. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation.
Of course. Thank you.
Listen, stay tuned, because it's time for Sumud.